Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to celebrate the International Women's Day with all of you. As a CEO and co-founder of a gender equity by design company, being here with all of you today means a lot to me, especially this year. The crisis we are facing has impacts on gender equity and violence against women. I thank you all for sharing this moment with us. We are very lucky to have three amazing guests who will help us to have new ideas and energy to fight for gender equity. I do believe that each of us and together we can have a huge positive impact. Our three speakers today come from very diverse backgrounds and ecosystems. Having them together with us will allow us to have a very broad and genuine vision and discussion. Naomi, Aurélie, and François-Henri, hello. It is a real pleasure to send this our review. Let's start with a brief presentation of each of you and your amazing engagement for gender equity. Let's start with Naomi Seder. Dear Naomi, my tech team is so honored and exciting having you with us that I feel some pressure presenting you. Naomi, you earned a PhD in classics some decades ago, but switched quite fast from ancient human languages to computer languages. Since 2001, you have been learning, teaching, writing about this incredible Python myth, and it's already the third edition of your book, The Quick Python Book. By day, you lead a team of Python programmers for Bleak Art Materials, and in your spare time, you speak internationally about the Python community and on inclusion and diversity in technology in general, amongst other hobbies. Naomi, it is an honor having you with us and a real chance, especially for European people, as we do not often have occasion to listen to you. We will follow with Aurélie Jean. Hello, Aurélie. Uh, you also earned a PhD, not in classics as Naomi, but in science. You are the founder and CEO of In Silico Veritas. You've been working for more than 10 years as a research scientist and an entrepreneur. But in computational sciences, you work and live between US and France, where you share your time between consulting, research, and teaching in grad schools and executive education, mainly at MIT, so in the US. You are also an advisor at the Boston Consulting Group and a mentor at the Frontier Development Lab at NASA. You're a science editorial contributor for many publications, and you're also an external collaborator for the Ministry of Education in France. Aurélie, you're just impressive. And you also find time to write books. We can see three in the screen. It's impressive, nothing else to say. And you fight day after day to help us understand biases in algorithm. We will talk about just after. Aurélie, thank you for being with us. It's really a privilege. And to finish the presentation, the third person is a man, as we need men to reach gender equity. Hello, François-Henri. François-Henri, I've been really impressed over the past 10 years by your wholehearted engagement for gender equity amongst your group and beyond. François-Henri Pinault, you're the chairman and CEO of Caring, and since 2000, you are gradually transforming your group into a global luxury group. You've been developed Caring into a pioneer in sustainability with a deep commitment to women, two causes that are particularly close to your heart. Today at Caring, women make up 33% of the total workforce, 55% of managers, 33% of the executive committee, and 58% of the board of directors, making the group one of the large companies in France with the highest proportion of women throughout its organization. Last Thursday, in the Equilib 2021 Gender Equality Global Report and Ranking, Caring have been amongst the top 10 companies globally for gender equality. Congrats. François-Henri, your engagement is remarkable, and it is a great pleasure and honor to celebrate this day with you. In addition, to share some ideas from the academic ecosystem with us, we will have 3 persons from Namboli, Anya, Guillaume, and my co-founder Thibault. Welcome to all of you. It's really an honor having all of you with us. To start, we will ask a question to each of our guests. What are you fighting for? It's a question for the International Women's Day. So, Naomi, to start, can you talk to us about, what you're fighting for, and especially, if you're okay with that, of course, about the impacts of misogyny and internalized misogyny. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, my perspective, I think, on gender is of course informed by my experience of being in the world as a man for many years, and then as a transgender person now being in the world as a woman for many years. And I think of that, the thing that stands out to me most is the fact that in general, if it is done by a woman, if it is associated with women, it tends to be valued less, sometimes despised, discounted, whatever. But I think in almost every area we can see this misogyny, this systematic devaluing and ignoring of contributions of women as well. And the thing that for me makes this the thing that I sort of fight against the most, I think, is that it's particularly insidious when we all internalize it. We all live in our society. We're all exposed to these attitudes since birth. We all internalize them one way or another, and that leads to then another factor that holds women back, that keeps us from achieving what we might. And then on top of it, quite often, we are blamed for behaving in a way that responds to that misogyny. For example, women maybe are accused of not being willing to take risks. Well, in this environment, it's very difficult to take risks. It's only a reasonable response, yet it's again turned against us. So this whole system feeds on itself. And so I think, it's the root cause for me, and I try to point it out as much as I can, having, as I say, seen it very clearly from both sides.
Thank you so much, Naomi. And now, after that, Aurélie, perhaps it's another way to look at it, and it's biases, because in misogyny you have also biases and strong ones. And Aurélie, I think that you are amazing on the biases in algorithm topic. And can you talk about these biases and how it impact today and also the future, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely. So obviously, I'm fighting every single day for women's rights in many areas. But yes, today I'm going to talk about algorithm biases that I fight against those. So algorithm bias, for people to know, we all have biases, based on our gender, or culture, or language, or orientation, sexual orientation, etc., etc. That being said, we tend to transfer those cognitive biases to the things we develop. Can be a book, a text, a song, and it can be an algorithm. So an algorithm is literally an error within the algorithm itself that tends to discriminate certain categories of people or situation. We also talk about technology discrimination. Usually, so for people to know, the biggest example that people really understand is like the fact that the first algorithm for facial recognition didn't recognize Black people, which was a big deal, obviously, that discriminated Black people. So I usually differentiate what we call the explicit algorithm bias and the implicit algorithm bias, so which is different compared to explicit cognitive bias and implicit cognitive bias. So explicit algorithm bias, it's actually a bias that comes from an explicit algorithm, which is an algorithm that you write by hand, you develop by hand, all the equations, all the hypotheses, all the criteria. And the implicit algorithm bias are actually the biases that are inside the implicit algorithm for which the logic is developed implicitly from machine learning. In both cases, you actually transfer your cognitive biases to the algorithm that you develop, either within the equation, within the criteria, within the hypothesis, or within the choice of the data that you make to train your algorithm. So it's important to distinguish those two. And obviously, those cognitive biases are from the developers. So people like me or Naomi who developed algorithm, but also people who are the users, the people who are using the algorithm because the algorithm is training over time over your own data as a user, etc., etc. So it's clearly explained here in this slide, and the big thing for me is how could I fight against those algorithm biases, and there are many ways. Obviously, there are technical ways, which is like all the testing we can do on the data itself, on the algorithm overtraining, after training, when the algorithm is on production, etc., etc. There's also a way to actually educate the user so the user can capture the bias very quickly. Also, to have obviously more diversity within conceptors, it's very much important because if, as I always say, I'm not better than anyone else. I have my own cognitive biases and I explain in my book. So obviously, if I have to develop by myself and alone a technology for everyone, I might discriminate men. So it's very much important to keep in mind that we need diversity within the team of developers, and that's why I fight a lot for attracting more women, into that field to show them how exciting it is to work in that field, and obviously so many other ideas like working closely with the people from the business. And I always give this example, for example, today, which is also very important, is the Day of Women's Rights, and I'm actually launching soon a new venture to protect women. So it's a venture with my business partners are actually attending tonight our event. And this is actually, we co-developed an algorithm, a technology based on AI to anticipate, to predict the risk of breast tumor in women. So it's a big deal. And obviously in the team, there is me, who is a computational scientist. There is also a doctor in image analysis. There is also a medical doctor in the team. So we need people together to work closely to better develop algorithm inclusive technologies in general, which is very much important.
Thank you so much, Aurélie. It is really important because it shapes the future also, and it's today fight, but also something for tomorrow. So yeah, it's when we're talking about gender equity and tech, it's a big concern for everybody. Thank you very much. And the third question will be to François-Henri. So, François-Henri, to what extent are you fighting against gender inequality within your group and beyond? Why is it such an important fight for you?
Well, yeah, it's true that the group has been embracing the cause of women for many years, but in reality, it was a journey between personal life and professional life, and it started precisely in 2006 when I met my wife, and she's been advocating for the cause of women and particularly fighting against violence on women for more than 30 years now. And I discovered through her in 2006 what was the reality at the time of violence on women. And I had the opportunity to meet people very much involved in that, like Eve Ensler, for instance. And I realized that despite the difference in culture, despite the difference in social classes or geography, that problem was absolutely everywhere. At the same time, and so that was the personal part of it. And at the same time, I was in the middle of transforming my company from a conglomerate towards a luxury group. And one component of that transformation is that women are absolutely everywhere. The vast majority of our employee are women. We are mostly talking in terms of customers to women. And by education, I always believe that a company must have a sense of purpose that goes beyond business targets. And this purpose has to be linked with the personality, with the profile of the company. So when you put all that together at the time, this awareness of violence on women, the fact that the group is going to be much more women driven going forward, and the fact that that cause was an orphan cause at the time mostly, I decided to embrace that cause, and I created 2007 the foundation, the current foundation, Fighting Violence Against Women. And over time, I extended that to the cause of women in 3 dimensions. So one is fighting violence against women. The second external cause is to promote the representation of women in art and culture. And to be more precise, it's called Women in Motion, and it's something that we started in 2014 in the movie business with the partnership in Cannes, and more recently, three years ago, in photography. And internally, as a group, the cause of women is the status of women at work, meaning that trying to understand first and to find solutions in terms of situation like remuneration disparity, how to put women in an environment where a professional career can be much more at par with men. So say in one word, to make the group the best place to work for women. So we've been working a lot on those 3 dimensions, and we're still working on that. The idea is to, when it comes to the company, it's to be in 2025 to reach the real parity between men and women, particularly in executive positions. So we're working. I'm even incentivizing my CEOs on that specific target for 2025.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting journey and very energetic journey for everybody, because it shows that it's possible, and it's so thank you to share that with us. Now we can go to the panel discussions, and we will have 3 main themes for that. The first one is very interesting, I think, and the question is, what drives us to be more tolerant? What prevents us from being more inclusive? So it's the difference between being tolerant and inclusive. And for that, Guillaume, can you give some words on it?
Well, thank you, Isolis. Well, actually, thank you for your first comments. When we speak about inclusion and diversity, we often see people making a confusion between tolerance and inclusion. So I would define tolerance as accepting the difference as soon as we are not disturbed by it. And inclusion meaning accepting to be moved by the difference of others. So if we see that difference, and I looked at the neuroscience, so how our brain is boarding both sides, I've discovered that tolerance has shown to be driven more on the known side of us, so what we already know. So it's more driven by our routines, or lack of willingness to adapt, the way we judge, the black and white judgment that we come through sometimes, the reasonings through empiricism, and a very strong social identity. Where inclusion is more driven by the unknown part of ourselves. So the curiosity we have, the willingness to adapt we have, the relativity in judgment that we come up with. Sometimes the logical reasoning and the personal consciousness that we come through. So I come back to my question, which is effectively from your own experiences. What drives us to be more tolerant in your view? or what could prevent us from being more inclusive?
Naomi, perhaps you want to share some thought about it?
Certainly. I think for me, one thing that I have noticed is that it is almost impossible for us as human beings to see uh, our own biases, and I'm sure Ollie can speak more to that, and also to see our own privileges, the things that we have that others do not, and we tend then to just assume that however it is we are is the way everyone else should be, and so this I think is the biggest obstacle, and I think the biggest. I guess I would say the biggest remedy for this is a theme that I have quite a bit, is in both accepting when people tell you things that lead you to realize you have privilege and bias and all of those things. They're giving you enormously valuable data about yourself that you cannot get on your own. And then also to try to widen your own networks. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that keeps us from being more acceptive and tolerance is, for whatever reason, it may be lack of willingness, it may be lack of opportunity, it may be a number of things, but not having a diverse set of connections, of friends, of people you know, that will help you develop those things. It's very hard to hate someone whose story you know. So that is the thing I think that I would like to see more of, people breaking out of their silos, their little boxes, and actually building connections with people who are different.
Yeah, and thank you, Naomi. I think it's really what we're trying to do today, and I do agree. This is a really important point in the gender equity fight. Aurélie, perhaps
Sure.
you want to add a word?
I would like to jump on what Naomi said about privileges, because it's very much important to be aware of this. You know, we tend to forget about, you know, we are all born with a set of privileges, or, you know, and we have to be aware of this to give it back, you know, and to do our best to give it back. And I remember when I met Naomi at Bloomberg a few years ago in New York, when I was working there, Naomi said an amazing things, and I kept quote you on that. You said that when I became a woman, I became invisible in this ecosystem, in the tech ecosystem. And this actually made me aware that, wow, Naomi is capable of saying that because she experienced both, and because she can capture, underline, emphasize now the privilege of being a man in that world. That being said, we have to move forward together. And that's why also what you say, Naomi, which is to widen your network. This is also something that I learned actually at Bloomberg, because I learned a lot actually at Bloomberg about diversity. And I learned one thing. They told us to actually be more inclusive and tolerant, you have to approach other communities. And this is what I did, which is when I was working at Bloomberg, I was, and I'm still doing it, I'm an ally of LGBT community. So I was part of the LGBT community to support them, to be with them, to do as much as I can to understand them and to help them. And it is actually how I realized that we face the same challenges, them as LGBT, me as a woman in the you know, male-dominated ecosystem, obviously. And then, and this is how actually I'm lucky, because my best advocates were men in my area. So my colleagues, my students, my managers, my professors were always my best advocates. And so I say that because, for instance, I was part of the Women in Tech community over there in New York. And believe me or not, but 40% of this community was men. So to me, it's a big deal. It means that 40% of those people who were men thought that it was also their their matter. You know, they had to work on that all together along with women. And so I love that, which is to me very much important, is that we need to be part of other communities, sometimes it's weird to say that in Europe, because we don't have the same culture in the United States and in Europe about like community, but it's good to be part of another community that is not yours originally, but actually you can understand and you can compare yourself and you can better help that way.
Thank you, Aurélie. You were, unless if François-Henri, you want to react, but we can go to the main part because you talk about it.
Just I would like just
Yeah.
to add that, first of all, it's important to talk about inclusivity before diversity. And for me, it's a prerequisite of diversity. No use in trying to be diverse if you're not inclusive. In the workplace is not inclusive. And inclusivity and diversity is a big topic for the group, and we commit to really transform our company in that dimension. And the first thing and the first word in the slide of Guillaume was curiosity. It's all about listening first, taking the time to listen and understand, and to try to do that and to make things very practical in the group. We have starting what we call a reverse diverse mentoring, which is for all the executive of the group, no exception, to really have a mentor from a diversity. Could be handicap, could be gender, could be culture, all type of diversity. And we have a way of handling the meeting so that we listen to it and to the journey of people representing those minorities. And that's, for me, the only way to start working on that. And I did it myself last week. And frankly, I thought I was quite accurate and updated on that topic. Let me tell you, I learned a lot. So if I can push people, it's really to listen and to put them in a situation to listen and understand.
Thank you very much, François-Henri. So men, yeah, perhaps they listen at Bloomberg, the 40%, and I think you're right, it's something very important. What about men? What is their role in gender equity? Obviously, they have a very important role. So perhaps, Thibaut, you can give us a quick overview of book Good Guys, a very interesting book.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you, Iselis, for this tricky question, I must say. In order to try to answer this challenging one, I thought the only way was to look at some existing book, and luckily there was one, actually Good Guys. This book was recently published, actually just a couple months ago, and written by David Smith, who's an associate professor of sociology at Naval War College, and Brad Johnson, professor of psychology at Johns Hopkins University. So I contacted them, and they wished they could have come, but unfortunately they couldn't make it, none of them, but hopefully next time. So I can only try to give you an idea of their great book in a couple of minutes, but definitely we should all read it, and especially guys in this room today, in this audience. We should all read it because it's all built around one key idea, that gender equity is not a woman's issue. It is actually everyone's issue, and probably especially a man's issue. Because much too often, I think men feel that gender equity isn't their problem, that they aren't involved. Basically, we aren't women, so it's not our problem. But in fact, and this book makes it very clear, we need men to actually take ownership of this problem, to not only talk the talk, but really to walk the talk, because men are clearly part of the solution. So if you look, for instance, at this graph here, you see that there is a very strong correlation. I mean, probably Aurélie could compute it for us, but very strong correlation between the companies where men are involved in gender equity and companies where there has been a key progress made towards gender equity. So it actually makes a lot of sense for companies to make everyone aware of this, and to have men really take a stance, be involved, and understand how important for them as men this is. And so it's a how-to book. So it's very pragmatic. It's very easy. You have things and questions you can ask yourself. So especially the book shows how to move from three steps, basically. Being aware. I think several of us mentioned how difficult it was to understand, to guess, to be aware of an existing bias. And I think, as Naomi said, very often you have to rely on others to tell you your own biases and your own behaviors. But we're all involved in this. The second step is to become active. So really to hold yourself accountable and to show up for women at work and at home. There's obviously key connection between the two. And last, to become an advocate, so to lead by example for other men and future generations. So the agenda is very clear. I think it's literally groundbreaking, and no man could avoid reading this and probably getting a little bit or maybe very moved by the book. So I can only highly recommend reading this book.
Thank you very much, Thibault. Who do you want to start to comment and to talk about men and their role in gender equity?
Should I start?
Sure.
All right. Hopefully, I of course agree with all was said on that, but let's not forget that when it comes to the professional environment, companies were made by men, for men, with men. As simple as that. So we created the problem for A to Z. So we have to solve it. Then the other consideration is that one key element in when you build a company and you want to have a long-term success with your company, it's to create what I call collective intelligence. And if you look at even the history of mankind, collective intelligence has two prerequisites. It's cultural diversity and gender diversity. So it's of course it's the right thing to do, but more than that, it's also a prerequisite for success when it comes to the professional world. So and because we created that non-gender diversity in the company, we have men being at executive level. We have to solve that again, because it's also the success of your company that is at stake by doing so. And there's many different biases. You know, when I started that, for instance, when we recruit, one element of having a disparity in executive position in a company, that when we recruit for those positions, most of the time we had to use a search firm because internal succession plan are not ready yet, or for many reasons you don't have the successor in your company. And we realized by looking at that with our partners in search firms that the database they use when they initiate a search is completely unbalanced between men and women. You have 2/3 of men, 1/3 of women. So by the simple decision we took in carrying what in 2011, I think, if I remember well, to say, well, when we start a search from the database of the search firm, I want to have 50% men, 50% of women. So you can just by a simple decision like that recreate somehow a parity at the beginning of the process of recruitment. So there's many examples like that where you can really retransform things. And again, it's as was said by Thibault, it's a woman's situation and it's a man problem to solve. I'm completely agree with that. Even on the field of violence on women, we've been working for the last 2 years with an association called Promundo in America to work on what is called positive masculinity. So it's a long-term work at the educational level to give a different image of what is masculinity. And it's something very important also to fight that situation of gender parity going forward.
Yeah, that's sure. And the crisis we are going through, I think, increase this problem. And this year is very important, even more important than before, to fight against that and be very sensible to that. I know, François-Henri, once you told me that violence is something that is a lot of time seen at work by co-workers, and today with a lot of work through I mean, people not meeting again. I'm sure that there are even more very complex situations. So I think that we need to fight even more right now. Naomi, perhaps you want to say a word or react?
Certainly. I mean, I certainly agree with everything that has been said. I will say again, from my experience, it's been it's hard to describe, but I will say that it's the second and third parts of that roadmap of being active, being an advocate, that I think are important, and I think that's what's encouraging to hear. All of the years that I was, as one of my students put it years ago, undercover as a man, I very rarely saw that when women were not watching. Very rarely were those allies really allies when women weren't in the room. I guess I would add, in LGBT matters, pretty much never were the allies when people weren't in the room. And that clearly will not function. That's an end. So, I mean, I am fond of saying I don't want allies. I want co-conspirators. I want people who are in the game with me. And that's the way that I try to when I am trying to help other groups as well, whether it's in race or whatever. But the importance of being active and being an advocate and standing up when basically when no one is watching is the key. And I am very encouraged to see that there are signs of that happening. 20 years ago, it did not happen. So, yeah.
Yeah, so standing up when no one is watching, we will keep that, I think. Aurélie, perhaps you want to add something?
Sure. Well, I think we cannot do anything without men, just because it's a scaling issue. I mean, in my career, I've been in a team of 50 people, scientists and developers, and I was the only woman. If men were not supporting me, I would have been lost. And the fact that they were supporting me so much, and they talked to me and they listened to me. François Pinot talked about listening. And I think it's very much important. So I mean, they did everything for me. Then we learn a lot. I mean, we hear a lot the word education, and it is also very much important because I had to educate myself to understand other communities beside the women in tech, community. So men also need to educate themselves, and this will happen because we as women also listen to them. They listen to us. We exchange. This is what François Pinot was mentioning, which is collective intelligence. Which happens with listening, exchanging, accepting, et cetera, considering differences, et cetera. So, which is very much important. And so I would say that usually when you want to change something in a team or in a company, two things. First thing is obviously you need to measure it, so you cannot change something that you cannot measure in a way, quantitatively or qualitatively. So usually that means in that case of gender equity, you need to actually measure the level of perception, because usually you might be surprised in a team or company with 20% of women, for instance, people might perceive the company, women including, might perceive the company inclusive, or diverse, which is not in if you look at the numbers. So it's very interesting. And the other advice, obviously, you need to measure what you want to change, and obviously you need to involve every single person, everyone, which I think has been said many times, during this discussion, which is we cannot move forward without men. And to me, it's very, very much important. And I try to talk to girls, women, parents, and men and boys, which is very much important. We need all of us.
Yeah, thank you, Aurélie. We will go through the last theme, and I mean, you can also ask questions if you want. Feel free for people who share this hour with us. Feel free to ask questions. The last theme is what would be the smartest concrete actions to maximize gender equity? Perhaps, Anya, you can tell us a word about a very interesting article in the Harvard Business Review that's been written by Stanford academics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Usually. So before I hand it over to our speakers for a final word on that topic, we would really like to share with you 10 concrete steps that we can take to further gender equality in our organizations today. As Easily said, these are derived from research by Shelley Coral, who's a professor of sociology and organizational behavior at Stanford University. She published a paper called Reducing Gender Biases in Modern Workplaces, a Small Wins Approach to Organizational Change, in which she presents a framework through which small incremental actions can be taken to then lead to bigger change. So, concretely, what can we do to have a positive impact today, regardless of our gender, according to these findings? Well, first off, we can start by making sure that everyone's voice is heard, really listening, as we emphasized earlier, and that no one gets regularly interrupted. This will allow us to better identify where ideas stem from and to give credit where it is actually due. It's also really important to pay attention to working hours, so encouraging and utilizing flexible work options, as well as trying to keep regular meetings during normal business hours. And when we do plan social activities outside of work, it's also good to try and be mindful of the venue and the timing. And then finally, reducing biases in promotion and hiring protocols is obviously key as well. It's really important to try not to make assumptions about who would be interested in different roles and to commit to really considering and hiring more diverse candidates. And finally, we can join or start initiatives that actively support gender equity. So we can consider mentoring women, joining gender diversity initiatives, and as we talked about earlier, really encouraging male colleagues to do the same.
Thank you, Anya. Actually, it's a kind of good recap of things we've already said. If I ask you this question, well, do you have some idea of smart, concrete actions already, perhaps?
I think I would say, without any hesitation, mentor women, because I had the chance to be mentored by amazing men in the United States and also women, but it was men first. And obviously, because I was part of teams where there were only men, so it was mostly men. And the fact that they gave me the best advice, really, to move forward in my career. They supported me to launch my company. They actually helped me negotiate my salaries at any level. I mean, they were my best support, and so yeah, they helped me know my value, and yeah, so I would say mentoring women is very, very much important.
Thank you very much, Aurélie. Naomi, perhaps?
Certainly. I think. I mean, I like all 10 of those suggestions. I think they're all excellent. I think I want to go back to what François-Henri said at the beginning, which is that you can't really do diversity without doing inclusion first. And I think the things there that get most to that are making sure that everyone's voice is heard. And I think that's particularly listening in terms of what diverse people in your workplace need in order to feel safe, to feel included, to be productive. So that is the part, I guess, that I would say has to come first. But I certainly think all of those are great ideas. As much as anybody can implement those, that is a gain for all.
Thank you very much, Naomi. François-Henri, perhaps?
Yeah, can I give you two? A simple one.
Yes, please. Feel free.
Very much what Aurélie said. It's really when you're in a company and you're in a position of an annual interview with a woman, make sure you don't drive this interview the same way you drive for men. For a simple reason, women won't express their professional ambition in the same way. So you need to be aware of that and making sure you make everything right to let women express their ambition. You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, a man will start to express his next step in his professional life as soon as he reaches he's taking step 6 or 7, or 5 or 6 even. Women, it's 8 or 9. So if you drive an interview in the same way, you miss the point. So that's a simple one. A more complicated one that we were able to implement 1 year ago in the group, it's, you know, there is a very important natural event that creates difference in the professional space between men and women. Is maternity. Maternity is a real element, and it's crazy because that's the most predictable event, but still companies, because made by men, are still completely disorganized to face that situation. Particularly, and then there is a bias that is unconscious but also conscious bias. When you recruit someone at same level of skills, everything equal except the gender, you will go for the guy for one simple reason, because at his age, the probability of the woman to be pregnant is very high. So you won't have to deal with that situation if you hire the guy. So that's a reality. So what we did 1 year ago is that we gave the same parental leave, the same maternity leave to men and women for maternity, paternity, adoption, so that or your father or your mother, whatever, men and women can live 14 weeks on the same basis. So whoever you recruit, you will have the same situation to face in case of maternity, paternity, or adoption. So that puts men and women at the recruitment base at par. And we've been doing that for a year, a little bit more than a year, and we already have very strong sign of change. First, men are taking it, so the parental policy is very much adopted by men, which is a good news. And I think that's a significant element to recreate that parity between gender in the workspace.
Thank you so much. It's yeah, it's very interesting, and I think very good concrete ideas and actions. Perhaps on this same, we have some questions from people who are listening us, and one is about quota. Quota and mostly regarding executive committee and managerial positions. So Nicolas asked, are quota are necessary? So perhaps a word. My vision, I can share my vision on quota is that it's not really fancy intellectually. I mean, it's not necessary to have done a PhD to do a quota. It's not very elegant in an intellectual point of view, but it's very efficient at some point. So it's not cute, but it's efficient. What do you think about quota? Yeah, really?
Yes, I love that topic. Actually, I wrote, so it's in French, sorry, I wrote a paper recently in Le Point to support the quota, the COMEX, and explain why. First, when we talk about quota, we tend to think about the fact that we choose someone because of his gender, her gender, actually, in that case. But in reality, what's happening, it's much more precise and smart, you know. What we do, and that's why I don't like to talk about quota, I like to talk about that data-driven approach, data-driven policy, you know, where we target a number, we want to get like, okay, let's say we want 50% of women, you know, CEO of companies, you know, whatever, at the COMEX, whatever, executive committee, sorry. Then what we do is that we actually try to increase the pool of the group of women in with the candidates, female candidates, by attract them, to make sure that we have the choice to pick the best. And if we do that, we actually increase the expectations for everyone, men and women. So I'm a strong believer of the data-driven policy. So that's why I prefer to talk about that, because if we talk about quota, then everybody's against it because we don't really understand the approach behind it, the rationale behind it. The reality is that as men and women, we don't have the same experience, we don't have the same life, the same past history. And in reality, we haven't, as François-Henri Pinault said, we don't perceive ourselves in the same way. So we don't sell ourselves in the same way. We don't talk about ourselves in the same way. And people don't perceive us in the same way. And I did it myself. I saw myself making a difference between girls and boys. So that's why to me it's very much important, to educate myself on every single day. And so my point is that to actually balance, the system, we need to have this data-driven policy. And believe me, we don't choose eventually a woman because she's a woman. We choose her because she's talented, because we attracted many women to apply to a job, and we were capable of picking the right one.
Thank you very much, Aurélie. Naomi, François-Henri, a word about quota?
Well, as you say, the list, it's intellectually speaking, it's not something that we like, but in terms of efficiency, well, I don't call it quota. When I incentivize my CEO to reach gender parity, it's somehow it's quotas. But as already just mentioned, it's about talent. It's about creating an environment where, when you have to choose, first of all, you have a parity of choice, which is already something important. And secondly, it's not just the right thing to do. It's also the creative collecting intelligence is something very important for companies. So by recruiting women to reach a level of parity, it's also something that is beneficial for everyone, not just for women, for men too. So we have to have this in mind. It's not just morally speaking the right thing to do. It's also something that is a win-win situation for men and women.
Yeah, definitely. I do agree with that. We have quite a lot of questions. Perhaps we can take one about mentor women and celebrate role models. Something about a comment on role models and mentoring. It's very different from Europe and the US. The culture is very different. Perhaps already?
Yes, I can give you when I actually realized that role models were important in every field, by the way. I was actually a scientist at MIT, and I was attracting girls, from undergrad to do internship in our team. And I was teaching them how to code in Python, actually, Naomi. You would have been happy. So in Python. And one day I asked the girls and I say, hey, why didn't you learn before? Why have you waited so long to learn how to code? And you know what they told me? They say, because we didn't see you. And the day they told me that, I realized that, oh my gosh, I have to talk to those girls. I have to, to do speeches. I have to inspire them. We have to do that all together. And a couple of years after, I met Naomi in New York, and I said, wow, there are kick-ass women in this world, and we have to, to show off, to talk. And I realized that when I was younger, when I was a student, I didn't have any role models. My role model actually were men. So like it was the Nobel Prize Professor Richard Feynman. So I am no woman, So I mean, so today it's key, to for those girls and men as well, because we tend to forget. But I received so many emails and messages from male students telling me that, oh, you are my role model. So I think that's a big deal, and we can. It's a matter of like inspiring other people, so people can say, hey, why not me? You know.
Thank you, Aurélie. Naomi, perhaps you want to add something, or we take another question?
I just a little bit, because I do want to follow up on that. I believe that as humans, we tend to organize, we tend to drive ourselves by the stories that we can tell ourselves. It's how we make sense of the world. So to Aurélie's point, when you have no way of seeing a story that puts you in a particular situation, it's very hard for you to then know the things and do the things that you need to do to get to that situation. So the more that mentorship becomes a way of enabling people to see themselves in a role, in a position, doing things that they hadn't imagined before, that's very much a necessity for enabling and empowering people to do that.
Thank you, Naomi. Perhaps another question for the last 5 minutes, because the audience today is very, very international, and very interesting question from Harold. Do you think you have to set targets for gender equity on a market basis, a regional basis? Do you have to set different targets regarding the geography, and at which level you think? Not an easy one.
I'm not sure I do understand the question. For me, parity is parity, whatever the language you're using. But
yeah, but if you set targets, do you think you have to set overall targets, or targets by area, regions, or countries, or so on?
you know, it's done even at a very, in my group, at a very lower level, as low as possible level, meaning that before we recruit, now we just trained last year all the recruitment people in the group in all the regions in the world, to make sure that before any recruitment at any type of level, to make sure we have an assessment on diversity of the team that is recruiting, being a store, being an accounting team, whatever, to make sure that we know where are we in terms of parity, not just gender, but also cultural parity. And then that you can direct the recruitment in a better way. So, and then we do that in every country in the world where we have to recruit people.
Thank you, François-Henri. Yeah, the granularity of all the quotas and objectives you can set is something complex sometimes in this point, and I think that we're going through more and more granularity, and that's good.
And I already mentioned something very important. If you want to change things, you have to measure them. Mm-hmm. When it comes to diversity, not gender, but when it comes to cultural diversity, in many countries of the world, starting by France or many countries in Europe, it's forbidden. So it's very complex. In America, you can, and already you have reports on minorities, and it's not possible in Europe. So we have to deal with a different situation, to try to adapt ourselves to be compliant with the situation.
Thank you so much, François-Henri. We are at the end of this talk already. It's been so fast. Perhaps one word to conclude, to give energy to people for this morning for you, Naomi and Anya, and afternoon for us in Europe.
I think I would say that it is sometimes very discouraging to look around and see all that needs to be done. I guess my perspective, being rather old, is that we have made quite a bit of progress, and I think the important thing is that we keep working together on this, men, women, and whatever groups they might be. I think that is our way forward, and I believe that we can do it. So yes, it is possible to get discouraged, but one should not always be discouraged. There are lots of good things happening.
Thank you, Naomi. François-Henri, last word?
Oh, very simple. The gender parity will become a reality for sure. So we better join the movement, proactively join the movement, or you will be excluded from the community. So it's not even a choice. You better join.
Thank you. You're right. Aurélie?
Well, I would just reuse a word that I've heard a lot during this panel discussion, which is listening. So I would say two things: listen well and ask any question you have in mind without feeling naive or stupid, or just ask it. And for others who are listening to those questions, be ready to answer.
Thank you so much. Nicely. Thank you so much, Naomi, Aurélie, François-Henri, Guillaume, Thibaut, Anya. It was really a real pleasure to celebrate this International Women's Day with you. And I'm sure we can do it. Naomi, you're right. It's a journey, but we will make it. And as François-Henri said, there is no choice. I mean, we will make it. So thank you all for your time, and thank you for this hour. It was really a blast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.